Over the course of the weekend, I found a little bit of time to play the Battlefield 6 beta. Now, I have a little confession to make before we get into this one. I've never been a big Battlefield player, but there's been a lot of hype around this game recently, and I know quite a few of you that are subscribed to this channel are fans of the franchise, so I wanted to cover it. Unfortunately, all of the footage I got, my microphone was not working properly, so we're just going to have one video today where I'm just going to discuss my thoughts on the game, and in the second part of the video, I'm going to wade in on the whole Call of Duty versus Battlefield debate that is currently going on. So I'm not going to list positives and negatives because, like I say, I have very little experience with Battlefield as a franchise, even historically, so I can't exactly go in and say, oh, I think it could have had this or it should have had that. I'm just going to talk generally about how I got on. So firstly, I actually really enjoyed the beta, and I enjoyed it a lot more than I expected, and I think probably a part of that is that I probably went in with a little bit of a negative mindset, right? Because I've never got on with the franchise historically, but I actually had a lot of fun. I mean, the movement felt pretty decent. Again, I don't know really what the movement is normally like in Battlefield, but it didn't feel horrendous, right? Although I could not get used to the slide. Whenever I tried to slide, I either messed up and got killed, or I'd end up going prone, so that was quite interesting. The gunplay felt decent. I mean, the TTK was pretty quick, but I think a large part of that is that, I'll be honest, I'm not the greatest at Battlefield, so I think when you're dying a lot, you know, you feel like if the TTK is quick, it feels even worse when you're on the receiving end of it. And it's probably a little bit harder to shoot in Battlefield, I'll be honest. It took me a little while to get used to kind of aiming, but I think as well, I can't say that my settings were perfect because the whole settings were, I mean, they were a little bit complicated. I think, you know, I probably need to spend a little bit more time on them, maybe watch some videos online, understand exactly what everything is, but I didn't have a huge amount of time to play, so I just kind of edited a few little bits, so maybe that could have been better. But yeah, overall the gunplay felt nice. It just was, you know, I think just a little bit more challenging to shoot, and I think as well, like I say, the TTK did feel pretty quick. The game looked amazing, I can't lie. I mean, the graphics are incredibly realistic. I mean, the game itself is very realistic, right? There's just lots going on, you know, buildings getting destroyed, debris flying everywhere, which I thought was pretty cool. I much preferred the smaller maps, playing like Domination and King of the Hill. That just suited me more as a player. I'm not a big fan of like the really, really big maps. I feel like they're a lot more sort of tactical. You play a little bit slower. That's just not for me, right? And I'll hold my hands up. So I didn't really play much of those, but I did enjoy Domination and King of the Hill. The game still felt a little bit slow paced though, like even in the kind of Domination game mode and King of the Hill on the smaller maps, the game still feels a little bit slower paced, but I think that just is naturally how Battlefield's meant to be played. I feel like Battlefield is more of a tactical kind of shooter. You know, it feels like you play off a lot less information compared to Call of Duty. I feel like on COD you got a lot more available to you, which allows you to maybe play a little bit more aggressive, whereas Battlefield you don't really know where anyone is a lot of the time, so you kind of have to, you know, play a little bit more tactically. Footsteps were pretty loud, I'll be honest. I felt like you could, you know, you soundhole people quite easily, but I guess maybe if that's probably maybe a historic thing of Battlefield, that's how the footsteps have always been. I will say I don't really like not knowing how I got killed, and again, I suppose this comes into the realism factor of Battlefield, like, you know, not having kill cams, but sometimes I die and I'm just like, I see where the player was, like the outline of where the player was, and I'm like, how did I not see that player? Or like, where did he come from? So like, I feel like that was something that I personally struggled with a little bit, was just, you know, I couldn't kind of learn the game as much because I couldn't kind of work out where people were kind of killing me from. I also have no idea how the spawns work. I don't know if there's like a specific spawn system or if you spawn on your squad teammates, you know, but, you know, I felt like there wasn't really an awful lot of logic to it. But then again, I didn't play for a huge amount of time, so maybe it's just something that you build up over time and you kind of learn. I'll be honest as well, there's probably a lot of the game that I didn't explore or didn't experience. Like I say, being new to Battlefield, there's probably a lot of things that I didn't use, a lot of things that I could do that I didn't know that I could do. And like I say, you know, I feel like with sort of 4 hours played, there's probably a lot more of the game to experience than what I experienced during my time on it. As I say as well, being very new to the franchise, you know, there's just, I don't really know, you know, how to approach the game. You know, I don't know, like, like I say, there was probably a lot of things like, you know, things that I had on my loadout and my class and stuff that I just didn't use. But what I will say is that I think I approached the game very differently to COD. I feel like when I approach COD, I'm taking it seriously. I'm trying to do the best I can. And I was taking Battlefield seriously, and I was trying to do as well as I could, but in a more relaxed approach compared to Call of Duty, right? And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that because I'm new to Battlefield, I don't expect to do that well. So it just allows me to be a little bit more chilled about it. And I think, again, the game just naturally being a little bit more slower pace, you know, you're not constantly in gunfights. You can be a bit more chill about it. And it just felt like all I really needed to enjoy the Battlefield beta more was probably just some friends to squad up with. I think if I could have squadded up with some friends, it probably would have been a lot of fun. Maybe I would have enjoyed the bigger maps a little bit more as well if I'd squadded up with friends. But I can safely say that from the beta, this game has gone from not being on my radar, right? I had no real interest in Battlefield 6 to now I'm actually considering purchasing the game. And I think that that is always a good sign. And I feel like a lot of the time with betas, I don't tend to get on with Call of Duty betas. So the fact that I've got on with the BF6 beta and it's basically, you know, convinced me to buy the game, I think is, you know, a W from Battlefield and EA. So that's going to do it for my kind of overall thoughts on the beta. I now wanted to kind of wade in on the whole Call of Duty versus Battlefield 6 debate, which is currently going on. And obviously the number one question being, will Battlefield kill Call of Duty? And my answer to that is, does it really matter? I feel the same about Battlefield as I felt with X-Defiant. I think that it will be cool to have another alternative to play, and I think it's good for Call of Duty to have some serious competition, and I think Battlefield's probably got a lot more chance of being bigger than X-Defiant was, and we obviously know what happened with X-Defiant. Eventually it got shut down. That's most likely not going to happen right with Battlefield. But the games at the end of the day are completely different, right? You know, and I think Call of Duty has always been an arcade style shooter. It's, in my opinion, it's an easier game to play. You can just, you know, pick it up very easily. Whereas like when I moved over to Battlefield, I was just like, this, you know, this isn't something I'm just going to know straight away, right? And I think that the other thing is that I don't want to see Beavis and Butthead running around the map, right? Like we've got in Black Ops 6, but no matter what they do with Call of Duty, the core fundamental principle of the game stays the same, right? And I think for me personally, nothing will ever replace Call of Duty, and that's not me hating on Battlefield, but I'm not trying to replace Call of Duty, right? I think there's a lot of people out there that, you know, just done with COD. They want something new, you know, to scratch that itch. For me, that's not the case. I want Call of Duty to, you know, fix a few things that they've got going on, and I think having a game like Battlefield maybe will, you know, help them do that, especially like, for example, if Battlefield's anti-cheat continues to work as it is currently, Call of Duty have got to step it up, right? Because their anti-cheat is almost non-existent. So I think it's good for COD to have that competition. And like I said, I think Battlefield 6 will compete a lot more than sort of X-Defiant did, and will be a bigger threat. But for me personally, like, I will not switch from Call of Duty because I don't want to, right? COD is just the game that I love. It's the game that, you know, that I've always known. And I think as well with Call of Duty, the multiplayer for me will always win outright. You know, I just think that the standard 6v6 experience is so much more fast-paced. I think having kill streaks to reward you, the prestige system, etc. You know, I just think that the core multiplayer experience, no matter what they do, is always going to be kind of the same. And I think where Battlefield could definitely challenge, in my opinion, is the Battle Royale, right? Because Warzone is in the trenches. There's, you know, no hiding away from the fact that Warzone's not in a good place. And although I think there is still a fairly large community of Call of Duty players that play multiplayer, I think the Warzone has become huge, right, in the last 3 or 4 years, and it's to a large degree makes up a big part of the player base on COD. So if Battlefield come along and they nail the Battle Royale, I think things could get very, very interesting, right? So I think it's going to be exciting to see what happens, right? I think that you can like both games. I think you can like one or the other, right? You know, that's where I stand. I think that there's a world where both games can exist. I'm not going to hate people for liking Battlefield. I'm not going to hate people for playing Battlefield. You know, but for me personally, Call of Duty is still going to be my main game. But I think what Battlefield have done is they've convinced me to definitely buy the game. And who knows what could happen in the future if once the full release, maybe one day I do switch across. I don't see it myself, but I think it's been definitely successful, this beta, in convincing me to play the game. And like I say, it'll be interesting to see what happens. Will Battlefield live up to the hype? Will Black Ops 7 fail? Time will tell. So that's going to do it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have, please do hit the like button down below. And please do let me know down in the comment section, you know, how you feel about Battlefield 6. Have you played the beta? You know, what are your thoughts on the whole Battlefield versus Call of Duty debate? If you're brand new around here and want to find your way back for more, please do consider subscribing to the channel. And as always, guys, I hope everyone's a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.